have the privilege of two segments with Fouad Ajami, a man who is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, a splendid organization out on the left coast, one of the few, I have to say, but eminent for its very serious work and the enormously impressive people that it employs out there. He is also a professor of Middle East Studies at my alma mater, much to their chagrin, Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies here in Washington. And he is also a certified genius. Now, you don't often get that, but that's what they call these prizes. The MacArthur Prize, which he won back in 1982. Imagine being a genius that long ago. Anyway, he is the author of numerous books, including The Foreigner's Gift. He writes lyrically, I have to say, often in the Wall Street Journal, and we are especially pleased to have him with us here at Secure Freedom Radio to discuss his most recent op-ed in the Journal of April 9th, entitled Afghanistan and the Decline of American Power. Fouad Ajami, welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. You have no idea what a pleasure this is. I'm so grateful to you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. It gives me a chance to, having traveled once with you to Saudi Arabia many years ago.
Indeed.
Here's another way of another encounter, but I'm honored to be on your program.
Good. Well, it's a delight that you remember that previous occasion, and we look forward to hopefully many conversations with you here. Listen, this piece that you've written for the Journal, in a way, is a masterful validation of something that I've been saying for some time, and I'd like to just sort of run it by you, that there is really now an Obama doctrine that we can identify. I've characterized it in my humble way as sort of a 9-word phenomenon. Diminish the country,
right,
undermine our allies, and embolden our enemies. And you go through in really quite chilling detail how this is now playing out. You know, it's one thing for me to sit here and say, well, that's what I think's happening. But you've actually, with your expertise and acumen about the region, have documented how, particularly in the person of President Hamid Karzai of Afghanistan, but more generally, how this doctrine is translating into real losses on the ground for us. Give us a flavor of this in the case particularly of Afghanistan, if you would.
Well, I think you've identified the elements of the Obama doctrine. To begin with, the steward of American power at this time isn't really a believer in the idea of American exceptionalism.
By that you mean the president, of course.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So we start with this. And I think that President
Well, he
Obama
believes in it like the Brits believe in exceptionalism of Britain and the Greek exceptionalism, right?
Well, that's
sort of the point.
That's about right. And I think that when President Obama came into office, he believed that he actually had a way of draining the swamps of anti-Americanism in the Islamic world. He believed that the Islamic world was his for the asking. That in fact that our dilemma in this greater Middle East that runs all the way, if you will, by some definition, if you want to talk about the Islamic world, from Morocco to Indonesia, that the problem was the Bush policy and the Bush doctrine and the Bush military endeavor in Iraq. So he set out to change the Islamic world, and I think he has such incredible belief in his ability to charm people out of their basic beliefs that he thought that a trip to a speech in Cairo, a speech in Ankara would do the trick. This is really the danger here. And I think when you take a look at where the strategic situation in the greater Middle East, you can see the defects of this policy. We come to Afghanistan. You were kind to mention that piece in the Wall Street Journal. My thesis there was very simple, that we have able commanders on the ground. We have a great fighting force, but we don't have a commensurate political strategy. Mm-hmm. And that if you take a look at someone like Hamid Karzai, who lives in a dangerous neighborhood, he can be forgiven the conclusion he's drawn, that Obama isn't in this war for the long haul. He's not in it to win, if you will, and to prevail. And that he watches someone like Karzai can look at the region and he can witness America trying to accommodate itself to the rise of Iran as a power and forgive him the conclusion that he has to hedge his bets.
Yeah. We're talking, of course, with Dr. Fouad Ajami of the Hoover Institution. I think of you as a great sociologist, maybe not by training, but by just inherent judgment.
Well, maybe it's just the fact of Lebanese birth.
Well, it could be, but really, that's what I was getting at, Fouad. You have so well articulated this sort of phenomenon that I think people, particularly people sort of in subsistence societies, close to the line of life or death, are particularly attuned to even the most minute shifts in power, because that can make all the difference. Absolutely. And what you've described here with Karzai, and we're speaking, I guess, in part at least of the recent sort of what seems from our point of view to be erratic behavior, denouncing the United States and saying he might go over to the Taliban and so on. And what you've really said here in your very, very important piece in the Journal is this shouldn't be a mystery at all.
Well, look, there's one thing about living in the path of great powers, as the Afghans have done, as the Arabs have done. You have a kind of an ability to read the wind, to sniff what an outsider, when the Sahib comes with into your world, you can see how long does he intend to stay, what his intentions are, what his staying power is. Mm-hmm. And I think the Afghans, as well as the Arabs, as well, take a look at the region as a whole. They've looked at President Obama. They've taken his measure. I'll give you one small example, ranging beyond Hamid Karzai. Let's go to the Mediterranean and take a look at the Lebanese. The Lebanese were emboldened by the Bush diplomacy of freedom. The Cedar Revolution was a child of the Bush diplomacy. It was the only way that the Lebanese, intimidated, burdened by Syrian rule, living under a regime of murder and extortion for 3 decades, they gathered their nerves and, with the backing of the United States, managed to get the Syrians out of their world. Well, now look at Lebanon today. This was 2005, at the height of the Cedar Revolution, and when the world really worried, and these rogues worried what Bush may have in store for them. Now we are in 2010. One Lebanese politician after another, including people like Walid Jumblat and people like Saad Hariri, whose fathers were killed by the Syrians, they have made their pilgrimage to Damascus because they've concluded if the U.S. is out to engage the Syrians, well, then they better secure reasonable terms of surrender for themselves.
Yes.
So throughout the region, you see people making an accommodation to the rogues and to the fact that imperial power, let's not be apologetic, American imperial power, the American umbrella, if you will, has been withdrawn.
Yeah. You put this so well in this piece, and let me just, if I may, read this, and then we'll take a short pause. Quote, all this plays out under the gaze of an Islamic world that is coming to a consensus that a discernible American retreat in the region is in the works. America's enemies are increasingly brazen, its friends unnerved. Right. Unquote. And how well that captures this idea that what we're doing is going to matter, not just in the region, but for us as well. When we come back, we're going to speak to Fouad Ajami about Israel. What we are doing specifically vis-a-vis Israel against the backdrop of this retreat that may simply conduce to war for them and perhaps for us. All of that and more with Fouad Ajami straight ahead.
Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney. You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio. Freedom Radio. Now more from Frank Gaffney.
Israel is our only true ally in the Middle East. Not the Saudis, not even the Jordanians who've helped us out here and there for their own reasons. Israel is the only true ally we have. It is flesh of our flesh. It's part of our civilization. It is the only rule of law democracy in the entire Middle East.
Well, that, of course, was our friend Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters speaking on Fox News on the 10th of April about one of the allies who is being undermined quite palpably by the Obama administration. And we have with us, again, thank you for staying with us, Dr. Ajami, Fouad Ajami from the Hoover Institution and Johns Hopkins University, author of many splendid pieces in the Wall Street Journal and other eminent publications, and the author of several important books that we don't have time to discuss here, but hopefully we'll get you back soon to do justice to. Fouad Ajami, give us your sense of the strategic implications of the kind of treatment President Obama has been dishing out towards Israel of late.
Well, fundamentally, Israel is in many ways the litmus test of how people see the world. I mean, I think that if you really want an issue in international relations that tells you where people's priorities and sensibilities are, I think the question of Israel and the Palestinians is a very, very good one, a very important one. We can say without any equivocation that George W. Bush's sympathy for Israel was visceral and integral to the way he saw the world. Mm-hmm. And that's why when he came in, he refused to truck with Yasser Arafat. He banished
even to see him.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. He banished him from the diplomatic world to which Bush subscribed. And I think that President Obama is a different man, and I think his reading of the Middle East is a very different reading. And I think President Obama has made, he has returned to this argument of linkage. It's an old argument that our position in the Islamic world as a whole, our place in the Arab world, is compromised by this Israeli-Palestinian impasse. And that what he needs to do is, now we even hear, that he needs to put forward his own diplomacy, that he could put forward his own calendar, he could put forward his own process, when indeed the only diplomacy that would work, and we have evidence of this 30-odd years of diplomacy, both good and futile, is when the Israelis and the Arabs talk to one another. Mm-hmm. And so the deal to be made is not between Washington and Jerusalem. The deal is to be made, I think, between Jerusalem and Ramallah. If this is the capital of the Palestinians, then that's how it should proceed. Mm-hmm. And there is something wrong with a diplomatic process and a view of the Middle East that basically, instead of addressing the menace of Iran and the challenge that Iran presents, because we have to be forthright about where Iran now stands. Iran has become a power of the Mediterranean. We think of Iran as a power of the Persian Gulf. Fine, thank you. It's their neighborhood. It's their world. But Iran, thanks to its links to Hamas and thanks to its links to Hezbollah, is now a power of the Mediterranean. Yes. Instead of addressing this issue, the president has gotten himself all tangled up in the question of settlements. Settlements are not the great obstacle. The great obstacle is very different. And that's the dilemma with President Obama. I think fundamentally President Obama, this was an issue that was there in the campaign in 2008. What is the level of President Obama's sympathy for Israel? And I think on balance, it would appear to be minor.
Yes, or non-existent, perhaps.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me just play a clip here of Daniel Gillerman, who is a former Israeli ambassador, speaking about, in a way, this precise point of the peculiar lack of attention to Iran as a threat and this preoccupation with housing and so on. 1315, Tim, that again seems to pervert and skew and otherwise corrupt our approach and give rise, I'm afraid, to far greater danger for our interests in the region.
This summit will begin on Holocaust Remembrance Day, when we have a president of a country threatening to wipe Israel off the face of the map and denying the Holocaust while preparing the next one. That is what the focus of this conference should be about. How to contain Iran, how to make sure that this extreme fundamentalist lunatic regime does not acquire nuclear weapons.
And Fouad Ajami, there seems to be very little evidence that that's actually the preoccupation of the administration, let alone that it's making real progress in that direction.
Well, I think there is. I think we will come to a moment of reckoning about Iran, and I think it's very simple. The options are very limited. Here they are. Either the U.S. takes out the Iranian nuclear option, the Iranian nuclear capacity, or Israel takes it out, or Iran becomes a nuclear power. And I think there is something that the president has not told us, President Obama has not really leveled with us about, that the administration has concluded that the Green Revolution, which they did not have any use for in the summer of 2009 in Iran, is not going to succeed. That this is the regime that's going to be in place, and they are ready to do business with this regime. And it is of a piece with this general idea of engagement. We want to engage the Syrians. We want to engage the Iranians. There have been some feelers to Hamas as well, and that's the mindset.
Yes, and I guess where it leads us to is really a situation in which, in this context, as in so many others, hence what I've characterized as the Obama Doctrine, the unmistakable message, as I think you said in your piece in the Journal last week, it is better to be an enemy of the United States these days than to be one of its friends.
Well, there is a quotation I had in that piece, which is, to me, remains compelling. And that's something that Zia al-Haq, the former ruler in Pakistan, once said. He said, being a friend of the United States is like sitting on the bank of a great river where the soil is lush and fertile. But every 4 to 8 years, the river changes course and you find yourself in a barren desert. I think the Muslims and the Arabs will rue the day that they questioned the wisdom and the policies of George W. Bush, because he actually really believed in their freedom. He believed that they didn't have despotism in the DNA. He tried to stand up to the dictators of the region. And here's the irony. You have George W. Bush committed to the freedom of the Arabs and of the Muslims. And here you have a man by the name of Barack Hussein Obama who has shown every inclination to sup with the dictators and to accept that, in a way, this kind of Orientalist argument that freedom isn't in the genes of that region.
Yes, to keep the repression on and to do business wherever possible with the repressors. Fouad Ajami, this has been a most extraordinary 2 segments. I thank you so much and hope that we can get you back soon because there's so much more to talk about. Fouad Ajami of the Hoover Institution and Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, author of, among others, The Foreigner's Gift, and the recipient of an extraordinary prize known as the Bradley Prize. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And again, be well, keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you soon.